Yeah, it's John Reed, and I'm talking about CMOs trying to figure out the content issue and have a better organic plan going forward. I'm with Stein. He's in Houston. This is his Twitter handle. We just had a conversation about some of the problems that CMOs are facing. I want to move a little bit into solutions. Thanks for rejoining me, Stein. How are you doing?
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so I want to talk about the blog that you just now published. You said the title is somewhat intriguing. It's what digital marketers can learn from the slow food movement. So why don't you tell us?
Yeah, John, I've been struggling with organic marketing for about a year now. I think it's the best form of marketing possible, but it has a lot of angles to it. And sort of I tried to put a framework together in the blog that I published recently to sort of talk about three things I think that make up this notion of doing inbound marketing really the right way. So I think three is this notion of organic marketing being a bet on being relevant, a bet on really helping audience, and by doing that, not being dependent on paid marketing as much anymore. And that doesn't mean that you have to shut down everything that you pay for, but starting with that notion is a good starting point, and try to be less addicted on whether it's pay-per-click marketing or sponsored content, etc. So that's really the part of that, going organic. The second part is I call it going local, like growing your food locally in your local community and buying it from them. The marketing equivalent of that is be less dependent on external help, whether it's SEO agency or it's a marketing consultant who helps you with your marketing strategy. A lot of those things are so fundamental for the future of your company, the value prop that you have, how well you know your customers. You should never outsource, for example, the creation of your customer personas. And we see that happen all the time. You should never outsource your SEO, your core SEO strategy, because what happens is an SEO agency with all the right intentions will optimize for things that will have an impact in the next few weeks, not the next few years. So that's the second notion of, although outsourcing in itself is not bad, and you need extra capacity for many things, it's really key that you have the local expertise and the local commitment to do the foundation really well. And then the third concept is growing your own food, just like in the slow food movement. It's about building these new skills of marketing, whether it's how you do keyword research or how you really understand the creation of personas and how it impacts how you build your own landing pages and the right offerings and the right call to actions. Those skills are needed for every marketer, including the CMO. And I see a lot of CMOs who don't really know how to work Google Analytics or how to use the hundreds of long-tail marketing tools that are now available. And can no longer delegate that. They have to get educated on a lot of these new ways of doing marketing, the new tools, to be able to then run very effective marketing teams, hire the right people, etc. So that's how I came up with sort of going organic, growing local, and growing your own, John.
Nice. We'll include a link to the blog in the video description so you guys can check it out. So one of the challenges, I think, is how do you justify the return on content? You talk about making this transition and moving kind of out of push mode, but there's also a lot of expenses and a lot of a learning curve around producing the kind of content that people want. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've figured that out? I know you've worn the CMO hat a few times where the light bulb started to go off for you about what this could do. Can you share with us how that's worked?
Yeah, John, it's a very interesting question, because on the one hand, you have to find this balance between things that have a very quick return and things that will take longer but are also more scalable. And I think companies will always have to do both. You cannot tell your board of directors or your shareholders you're just going to some content that's maybe going to rank in 6 months from now, and everybody should hold their breath for a few months before we'll see any visitors to the website. That doesn't work. So you have to combine doing content like that with things that have faster results, whether it's proactive events that you organize, or even a press release, right? That has sort of the balance between doing things that have a short-term impact and long-term. But then when you think of the ROI of content, that's where I had a lot of learnings, especially in the last year. Content is best written by people who are adding value to what the audience needs are. And there are two types of that. There are really good writers like yourself, or people who typically wrote for newspapers or for magazines, and that are very valuable. And it takes time to create content by them because they actually do research. They actually try to add to the body of knowledge that we have online. And that's the type of content that you absolutely need to invest in. But great content doesn't just have to be that type of content. You can also create great content relatively quickly by listening to customer conversations, by listening to your customer service department, and listen to the questions that customers are asking, the pain points that they're complaining about. And those are articles that are much better written actually by the people on the phone with those customers every day. And if they're not great writers, you can record those conversations. You can do interviews like what you and I are doing right now, and then sending it off and outsourcing it actually to a person who's just good at writing blogs, who's good at writing well-written English, is fine. And it doesn't have to be a well-researched article that needs much more investment, but it is hitting on something that customers are asking your company about every day. So it's, I think, a mix of those types of content, John, that can get you good ROI, that can get you some things that are not that hard or that expensive to produce, that are really relevant for your customers.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, because there's different types of content that you can produce, and it really serves a different need for your audience as well. And a lot of companies do underestimate what you just described, which is the value of just helpful content, right? I was looking the other day on a WordPress thing, and I couldn't find the right how-to piece that would have been very helpful. So you can see how the FAQ type content and just practical lessons can be very valuable. And that doesn't necessarily draw new people into your product if they're not ready yet, but it does serve a real need for people who are acquainted with you that want to learn more. So I think when I talk about it, it's sort of mapping the content to the different types of audiences. And then some people say it's mapping to the sales cycle, whether or not that's exactly true. But then you can really produce content that really meets those needs.
Yeah, you're mapping to needs, you're mapping to interests, right? And they happen to fall somewhere in a cycle, whatever you call that cycle, whether it's the customer life cycle or their buying pattern, etc. And I think listening to those conversations that I mentioned is a great way to start. And it can be a sales conversation, it can be a conversation that you have in a more maybe unofficial context, where you talk about your company and you try to answer questions like, what do you guys really there's just a lot of potential to help people, as you said, to help them with needs they already have.
So if you started a job, a new big CMO gig with like another big company, like, I mean, not using Microsoft as an example, but like a large company, what kinds of things would you do to start sort of doing what you're describing, of striking that balance between, like you said, you can't just tell people we're going to put everything on hold for organic for 6 months and then you're going to be amazed by the results. So what would you do to sort of realign those goals?
Yeah, I would take a few steps, John. One is a little more, how do you call it, hardcore. I would limit some of the paid marketing resources. I would make it clear to the marketing team that growing organic search results, for example, or growing keyword rankings is a way to see if we're actually talking about relevant things to our customers, right? And are we actually talking about things that people want us to talk about? So I would limit some of those shortcuts for the team. So that's more of a cultural thing that I think is an important starting point. I would get really into a detailed level of analytics on how many people are coming to our website that are landing on the homepage versus on separate dedicated landing pages, because it tells you a lot about if people already knew you or they were looking for other things that you may have content about and they found you. And by doing that and having people landing on your landing pages, you can actually start to figure out what they were looking for. And that's critical because Google doesn't tell you that anymore. Since a few years, as you know, Google doesn't disclose a lot of the searches anymore. So you need to figure out how do you get all the traffic off of your homepage on really dedicated landing pages where you know what people were looking for and you can help them with relevant call to actions, relevant offerings, etc. I would immediately start interviewing or listening to recordings of sales calls, of customer service calls, and make sure that we learn from those immediately. Are we addressing the needs of our current customers or current prospects on our website with our content? Because that's a great starting point. Long tail and long-term content would have immediate impact on what you're putting on your website, your conversion rates on certain pages, etc. I would limit a lot of sponsored content, John. I think if you have a very specific audience that you know you can reach through a third party, and you know that you have to pay for that because the third party has many requests for access to their audience, and you're able to do it really in a relevant way, and you have something that that audience will care about, then it's fine to sponsor something. But the times that actually happens and that those boxes are checked in most companies is very limited. So I would probably cut a lot of sponsored content efforts, and again use some of that money to make the content we publish a little more relevant. Sorry.
No, finish that up.
Yeah. The one example I have, so the company that I run, where I'm a CMO today, mightycall.com, most of our traffic, about 40% of our traffic, John, comes only from a few blog posts, and we did hundreds of them. And it's really the blog posts where we help people with something they need to achieve every day. An example is, how do you set up a professional voicemail system? It's a blog where people stay on the page sometimes for 10, 15 minutes. So they come to this blog post, and it's so helpful that they put it up, they leave it on the screen because it actually helps them set up their voicemail system. And that's the type of content. If you can get people to be glued to your screen and really, and use it, that's what Google will reward with a lot of great, rankings. And you can only find that type of content by listening to the questions that your customers ask to you every day.
Yeah, you and I also had an interesting little back and forth around the HubSpot inbound marketing certification, because we were talking about, well, how do you get up to speed on some of these new skills? And I'm inbound certified now, and I wrote about that.
Congratulations!
Yes,
me too.
Yes, very exciting. I know when you probably got the same excited feeling when you got your passing score. It was really funny. I hadn't taken a test in a long time, so I was like, whatever. I criticized a little bit the format of the test. I actually think the knowledge is somewhat useful, but it does raise the question as far as to do this right. I do think there's a new knowledge base that's required. The good news is there's programs like that will get you started, but I do think it requires, I think you said earlier, being a little more humble about things, because I don't think marketers know as much as they think they do just based on the fact they've been in the industry for 10 years and know all the tools, Yeah,
I'm very passionate about this this topic, John. I think the HubSpot inbound marketing certification, and so this is not so much about their own technology, but about this concept of inbound marketing, is extremely valuable for two groups of people: people that are about 20 years old and did not do their marketing undergrad yet or MBA, and people who are 40 plus like me. And it's a relatively shallow set of content. If you look at the videos, they're 26, 28-year-olds basically teaching you how to do very fundamental things with a relatively simple template, etc. So a lot of CMOs and experienced marketers, they get thrown off by that a little bit. Say, this is really not that insightful, not that interesting, not that great. But when you then ask them, are you doing actually what's being taught in that course? Do you think it's important, and are you actually living by those rules? And most have to admit that they don't, right? And that's where people like me and other CMOs who've been in the game for a long time can really get a really nice cold shower on, are you doing the basics well? So think of the inbound marketing certification hubs of me as sort of that experienced marketers will learn a lot of new things. But then when you think of the younger crowd, so I hire a lot of, at Microsoft I hired a lot of MBAs, John. And they were, of course, great for things like product marketing strategy and really the more advanced parts of marketing. But when you think of just the normal nuts and bolts of marketing, doing content production, doing SEO, etc., you don't really need an MBA for that. You need a lot of basic skills and need to learn a lot of these hundreds of tools to do keyword research, etc. You need to do that. And doing HubSpot inbound certification is a great way for me to get younger people who may not have a marketing education yet, to get them going, to see if they're willing to do this, if they like this craft, if they like this field, and then get them off to a good start. And then on top of that, you can do things like the Moz Academy, and there are many other great sources of education. But the HubSpot Inbound one is just a nice one that's sort of complete, and it is a good way to start.
Well, I will admit, even though I gave the multiple choice test somewhat of a hard time, I will admit that for me it's good for a different reason, which is I'm someone who kind of broke into formal content strategy from the content production side, right? Like I've been producing content pretty much since I could hold a pen, and I've always been a writer, and it's sort of the discipline of the business side of it that I had to acquire over time. And the HubSpot course was one good way of kind of seeing how they see the different components of that business strategy around inbound. And I think that is useful because they include things like the all important sort of sales and marketing gap and how to make sure that you avoid that disconnect between sales and marketing that we've covered. So I like it for that reason. But I would also encourage people who are interested to also just take a look at the HubSpot.com website, because I don't know about you, but I find that the website itself is one of the best ways you can learn more about so-called, best practices, what actually works, because they've got a really nice setup in terms of free content that's appealing to a broad audience, but then also a variety of opt-in content of various kinds where they're starting to essentially acquire data from a prospect base, you could say, where you're really building trust gradually. They have a concept of progressive sign-up where you're gradually giving away more information to a company in exchange for valuable content, but only gradually. So the relationship feels much more natural, I guess you could say, as opposed to some of these websites where they're asking you to give up so much in the beginning. And it almost feels like, well, where did the first date go? Why aren't we sort of starting more gradually? And I think they've done a really good job of that. And also landing page design, like you were talking about, very focused on topics. So I would really encourage folks to take a look at that from the overall way the site is constructed.
Yeah, they did a lot of the basics really well, John, and partly because they really committed to the inbound marketing philosophy and not do things paid. So it forces you to do certain things really well. But you can, HubSpot is a great starting point. Moz is another one that has great content. Copyblogger, who you probably know very well.
Yep.
But yeah, HubSpot is a great one for especially B2B.
Yeah, and I mentioned Copyblogger in the end of the blog post. I'm actually going to be writing more on that because I don't know if you had a chance to dig into Brian Clark's course he put together called The New Rainmaker, but it's another form of content strategy and training, and I think it's pretty fantastic. It's more sophisticated than the HubSpot content. He doesn't try to touch every subject like they do, but the ones he hits on, much more sophisticated and detailed in that regard, and I highly recommend that course also. So if you haven't taken it yet, you might want to check it out, man. It's really good.
I will do that, yeah.
There's about 10 or 12 webinars and audio things. At the time I was done with that, I was like, man, I feel like I could go really kick ass on this, and we'll see if I do or not. But
good, that's my spring project to keep learning, John.
Spring homework.
Hey,
so do you have any? Yeah, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
You asked me before what I would do if I joined a larger company to get going with a marketing team. The one thing that I also find very interesting, a learning I had the last year, is when let's say you write a good book and you're an unknown author, but you wrote this great book. The biggest challenge you have is nobody knows about you, and they're never going to find your book and nobody's going to write about it or refer to it, etc. So there is a need for a little bit of amplification early. And what's interesting with the Google algorithm, and nobody knows for sure because it's kept so secret, but when you think of some of the A/B testing that companies like Moz do, it seems to be that what Google does in the first 24 to 48 hours after someone publishes new content, so new content gets crawled online, like when you would publish a new book, Google looks at what is the news value of this item. It basically gives you a little bump in the rankings the first 24, 48 hours to sort of test the waters, to see, okay, when people find you and they click on you, do they stay on your page? Do they engage with your content? Do they share it, etc.? So that first 24, 48 hour is very critical. Then the other moment in time it's very critical, it seems, is about 2-3 months later, where Google does another check. It basically looks at, does your content have a long shelf life? Does it have into news value? Did you add something new to the world of content? Did you also create something that lasts, that people still find interesting after a while? Those 2 moments in time, well, if your content does well early on and it still does well a few months later, and doing well means people stay on your page, your bounce rate is relatively low, etc. That seems to be critical factors in addition to people linking to your content to get great rankings over time, John. There are a few things people can do, and paid marketing may be the only situation where I would allow to do a little bit of paid amplification with, for example, Twitter ads to get people to know about that book that you just wrote in that first 24, 48 hour period, to get people to see the blog that you just posted, even if you're not very well known yet. So that's where a little bit of amplification with ads that just showcase your content to have a good effect. And then you can do, of course, things like content syndication that are a little more more specialized ways of getting your content under the eyes for people who look at similar things.
You do make a really good point there, and I'll add one more piece to that, which is that I often preach the virtues of blogging, and one of the reasons I like blogging a lot for content is because it gets people going, because blogs don't have to be perfect, as you know. People accept fairly informal pieces as valuable if they provide something that makes a difference or helps them or gets them to rethink something, or maybe you're live at an event and you have a unique point of view. I also really like blogs for companies if they can encourage individual authors and individual viewpoints, because it's more relatable, right? Like at its best, a blog gives a much more human face to a company than a lot of more sort of formal, polished, like, for example, polished videos and such do. But I would say that periodically I encourage folks I work with to take a look at all the blogs and say, are there certain themes that are really standing out that we could develop into broader reference pieces? Because that's really how you establish authority, right? Because the one danger with blogs is that they can be perceived as a little topical, both by readers and by Google, right? Like if I wrote like a piece on a CMO event from a year ago, well, it's a year now. And how many people are going to want to read that? But there could be some really good ideas in there that would make sense as part of a broader sort of what you might call, I hate to use this word, but kind of a thought leadership piece around that. So I really encourage people to think about creating reference content, because reference content can be very, very popular in terms of that staying power that you described.
Yeah, and maybe the keyword there is, are you educating people, right?
Right.
And if you are, that typically has a longer lasting value, and it should not be published just as a one-time thing. I absolutely agree with you. Yeah.
And the other thing is that
blogging is an easy way to get started with that, right? And you can sometimes roll up some of that content with more context and relate it to each other into an ebook or something like that.
Right. So anyway, it's a good conversation, and it's one I look forward to hearing more from you on in the future. Now you're blogging regularly right now on the chiefoutsiders.com site, so we'll include a link to that. Any final comment for the audience before we wrap up?
Great, thank you, John. I would say every marketer, listen more, make less noise, and you'll actually get more results. I think that will be the one takeaway that I learned the last few years.
Okay, so listen more, make more noise, get better
Make
results.
less noise.
Make,
Make less
all right,
noise.
make more noise. Right, yeah. Listen more, make less noise, get a better result.
Exactly.
Okay, you got it. Thanks, man. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, John. Bye.